Hi everyone, my name's Diabetor, and today I'm going to show you how to make the ultimate Magma Blades build. The Magma Blade is a somber curved sword that does fire damage and scales best with strength and faith. Because it's a curved sword, you can dual wield them and get the sick jump attacks that hit 4 times in a row, which allow you to proc up the multi-hit bonuses from Talismans like Milicent's Prosthesis and the Winged Sword Insignia and do insane damage. But what makes the Magma Blades really good is their Ash of War Magma Shower, which is a variant of the Spinning Slash Ash of War. Not only is that great because Spinning Slash is just one of the best Ashes of War in the game in general, but in addition to that, Magma Shower also leaves behind pools of magma that do damage over time and can help you really shred enemies. Combine that with the Talisman of the Dread from the DLC, which increases the damage that your magma pools do, and you end up absolutely melting everything you come across. So I'm going to show you how to make this build, where to get all the items for it, and how to get the most out of it. If you find this helpful, please leave a like, share the video, and consider subscribing. It really helps me out. To start off, I'm going to give you an overview for the stats of this build, and explain why I chose them. Then we're going to go over the weapons, talismans, and armor, including a few variations of the loadout in case you don't have the DLC, or if you want to set the build up a little bit differently. Then we'll go over spells and additional buffs. And then finally, I'll give you a brief overview of the order in which you should level your stats up for this build. After the overview is done, I'll show you where to find the most important items for the build, and then we'll end the video by watching some gameplay, and I'll tell you about how to get the most out of the build. To start off, let's take a look at the stats. As usual, I set this build up to be at level 125 with max level weapons, starting with the Wretch class. You can change these numbers around as you want or as you need. For example, if you want to bring it up to 150 or higher for the DLC or whatever you're doing, then you can do that. I just choose these things because this is my personal preference. If you have a different class, then your stat numbers will end up being a bit different, obviously, because, you might start with like 11 intelligence or something like that. But, this is the rough overview around where all of your stats should be, the most important one being, of course, Vigor. And like I said, there's going to be an overview in a little bit about how you should level up your stats in what order, so check out the timestamps if you want to skip to that. We'll start at, I think it starts at like level 50-something, and then it's going to go higher, up to like 150 or so. Alright, so first off is Vigor. Vigor is always your most important stat. Every class needs to have at least 40 Vigor by the end of the game, preferably 60, and especially if you're going into the DLC where the enemies hit really hard, you should have 60 Vigor. So I always bring it up to 40 for these guides, and then, if you want to take a few points out of strength because you want to be tankier or something, because you'll see we have 51 strength. If you want to take a few points out of strength or something and put those into Vigor instead so that you can have more health to work with so that you don't die as often, then, that's what you should do. I like to go with Vigor because I just feel like that's a good number to have, at least for me personally. But, you'll see when I do the DLC that I'm going to have higher Vigor because going into the DLC I level it up. But yeah, so at least 40 Vigor. Doesn't matter what your build is, you always need at least 40 Vigor. We're also going to have 20 Mind. Normally I wouldn't put too many points into Mind, I'd bring it up to maybe 15 tops. But we're going to be spamming the Ash of War a lot because the Ash of War in this thing is so strong, so it's good to have the extra FP for that. And in addition to that, since we're going to be having a decent amount of faith, we're going to be using a couple spells for buffs, and so having the extra FP for that is also really good so that you can cast all your buffs without having to drink a blue flask. After that, we've got 22 Endurance. Normally I go to 20, but I included a couple variations of the build that use different talismans and armor sets, and so you might end up needing a little bit more than 20. So 22 is what I went with, because with the heaviest way that you can set up this loadout, based on how I have it in the build, you need 22 in order to be in medium load, so that's what we went with. If you're not using some of those heavier things, then you can drop it down to 20 and you'll be fine, but, whatever. 2 extra points of endurance isn't a big deal. Now for the damage stats, so you'll notice that the Magma Blade at max level gets a C scaling in Strength, a D scaling in Dex, and a C scaling in Faith. So at a glance, you would assume that you want to level up Strength and Faith about equally so that you get an equal amount of physical damage and fire damage. But that's not actually the way it works. If you look at the Magma Blade, you'll notice that no matter how much you level up your Faith, you're always going to end up with significantly less fire damage than physical damage unless you completely neglect your strength and just go pure faith with it. And even then, it's still not going to be all that much fire damage because the base fire damage is always going to be lower than the base physical damage. So you get a bunch of extra fire damage from scaling, but the base is going to be 100 lower anyway, so it's never going to be all that great. So the way to maximize your damage with this weapon is actually to focus on strength until you have about 40 to 45 strength, and then put a bunch of points into faith. And actually, if you wanted to get like super optimized, then it would be better to ignore faith and go with dex to just focus on leveling up the physical damage. But of course, we want to do a bunch of fire damage, so I like to bring up the strength because that's what gets the good scaling for the physical damage, and then we go faith. So in this case, I went to 51 strength and 33 faith. That'll give you a reasonably optimized damage split between the physical and the fire damage, and having the extra faith means that we get more buffs anyway, so technically our damage will be higher than if we had just focused on strength, because we're going to be getting percentage increases from buffs like Golden Vow and Howl of Shabriri, which I'll talk about when we get to the buffs section of this video. We've also got 18 dexterity, so you could get away with it just having 15 or even 10, because we're going to be using Milicent's Prosthesis, and that gives you plus 5 dex. We're using the Prosthesis for the multi-hit buff that it gives you, but it also gives you plus 5 dex, so that's a nice bonus, and that increases your damage. So you could get away with having 10 or 15. I went up to 18 because there just really wasn't anywhere else to put points that would really do all that much. You know, by the end of the spread between getting the vigor, mind, endurance, strength, and faith, you know, we had like 3 to 7 points left over or whatever. So I just put them into dex because that's going to give us the biggest increase to our damage number. If you want, you could put those points into faith so you can get access to maybe a couple extra spells or slightly more fire damage. You could put those points into strength, and then that would bring you up to 54 strength. And so if you two-hand it, then the 50% effective strength increase from two-handing would bring you up to the strength soft cap of 80. And so you could use one Magma Blade and have a fuckload of strength with it. You could put those points into endurance, but I went with dex because I was just looking for the one-handed damage. So that concludes the stat overview. Like I said, at the end of the build overview section, there will be a leveling guide for as you're leveling up your character, so you can skip to that if you want to see how that goes. But now we're going to move on to the weapons, armor, and talismans. Now our weapons loadout is going to be pretty self-explanatory. We've got dual Magma Blades. You can get away with using one, especially if you're just spamming the Ash of War, but you know, we're going to take advantage of the curved sword jumping attacks that are super strong. They hit 4 times in a row, so that makes it proc up successive hit bonuses from talismans like Milicent's Prosthesis and the Winged Sword Insignia. It makes it proc up those super fast so that you can just get a fuckload of damage, and that increases all the damage you do, which includes from the Ash of War, so we'll get to that when we talk about actually using the build. But yeah, so we're going to be using dual Magma Blades preferably. Farming them is kind of a bitch to do, but it's not too bad, and I'll show you how to farm them pretty easily. We've also got a couple Sacred Seals equipped. The primary one we're going to use is the Clawmark Seal. We're going to use that to cast all of our incantations and stuff. So the Clawmark Seal scales its incant scaling with faith and strength. So since we're a high strength build, that's the one we want to use. If you're using it for like healing spells or something like that, then you want to get something like the Godslayer Seal, because that'll give you higher incant scaling from faith specifically, and that's what healing spells scale with. But for any spell that does damage, it scales with just the overall incant scaling of the seal. So Clawmark Seal will maximize the damage you get with the spells in case you want to use spells. I also equipped the Fire Giant Seal, so this is optional. The spells are really like an afterthought for this build because we just end up having decent faith because of the Magma Blade itself. So, you know, but it gives you access to a bunch of spells, and if you're using fire ones like Giant's Flame Take Thee, and a couple other things like that, then, you know, you might as well have the Fire Giant Seal alongside the Clawmark Seal so that you can get the buff from that. But like I said, it's optional. You're not going to see me using the spells that much in this guide because we're mostly using faith for Magma Blade damage and for casting buff spells. Now for the talismans and armor, you've got a couple variations to the loadout that you can switch up based on how you want to use the build, like if you want to use jump attacks or if you want to spam the Ash of War. And there's also a couple options based on whether or not you have the DLC, so don't worry, if you don't have the DLC, you can still use this build. It'll just be a little bit different. So I'm going to talk about the armor first. The most basic thing you can do is just wear the Knight set from the Round Table Hold. I couldn't really think of any kind of like fashion or drip to go with this like I did with my Dragon Communion Seal build, so I just went with the Knight set because, you know, fuck it. It's solid armor, it doesn't weigh all that much, it gives you 51 poise, it gives you solid protection to all the different damage types, it gives you good immunity and robustness and all that, so you really just can't go wrong with it. You can buy it from the Twin Maiden Husks at any time, so it's super easy to get, and it's just a solid armor set, you know. Armor in this game is basically optional. It's mostly cosmetic, you know, like you should wear armor, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you should run around naked, but the protection that you get from armor isn't quite as much as you think it is, especially when you're using buffs such as talismans and consumables that increase your damage negation anyway. So armor is, you know, not like super important, which is why I only go with like 22 endurance, because you really don't need to wear those super heavy sets of armor. You're not going to notice much of a difference between wearing, you know, the Knight set and wearing like full bull goats. Like, it's really not that much. It's only a few percent. So yeah, so Knight set, you can't go wrong with it. With that said, the other reason you would wear armor is for buffs and stuff. So the most basic thing that we can do to modify this loadout is switch the Knight's chest armor over to the Raptor's Black Feathers, or if you have the DLC, you can use the Gravebird's Black Quills or whatever it's called. That'll increase your jump attack damage, so that goes really well with the curved swords because they get those 4-hit jump attacks that I've talked about 8 times now. And also, since the DLC added a bunch of armors that have a lot of buffs to them, I decided to include the Rakshasa set as an optional set that you can wear instead of the Knight set. This will increase the damage that all of your attacks do, but it also makes you take more damage. I think technically it doesn't actually increase the damage you take, it just has lower protection than you would expect from armor that weighs this much, but it basically makes you just take more damage than normal, but you also do a bunch more damage. So if you want to really maximize your damage, then that's the way to go. And of course, if you have different armors that you want to wear based on buffs, so for example, you could get the Halig Tree Knight Helm, which increases your faith by 2, I think. There's the Battle Mage Hood that, or whatever it's called, the High Glintstone Crown, I believe it's called, that you get from the Battle Mage in Altus Plateau. That increases your strength and your faith by 2 points each, so that one could be useful. There's like the Divine Beast Helm from the DLC for strength and dexterity. So, you know, you can wear whatever armor you want. I definitely recommend trying at least the Raptor's Black Feathers because the jump attacks are really solid. But, you know, it's only a few percent increase to your jump attacks or whatever, so it's not a huge deal if you want to go with fashion instead. Like I said, armor is mostly for fashion in this game. Now, slightly more complicated than the armor is going to be our talisman choice, because talismans do matter, and they matter a lot. So the two ones that are going to be universal between the different loadouts that we have are going to be Milicent's Prosthesis and either the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia or the Winged Sword Insignia. So in one playthrough, you can only get either Milicent's or the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, but if you choose Milicent's, then you can also go to a cave in Liurnia and get the regular Winged Sword Insignia. And so you can stack those two together. So that's what I recommend if you're on your first playthrough or whatever. But yeah, so these two talismans are going to be universal across all the loadouts that we do. So Milicent's increases your dex by 5, which is nice, like I said earlier. And more importantly, it gives you the successive hit bonus that increases all damage you do based on how many attacks you've done in a short period of time. So, you know, since we're using dual swords, and if you're doing like the jump attacks, then they hit 4 times in a row, it procs up that buff a bunch. That buff has 3 tiers to it, and so you end up getting like, I don't know what the exact numbers are, I want to say it's like a 13% damage bonus or something like that, to all damage you do really fast after only like 2 jump attacks. I might put the numbers on screen, I'm not going to go over it right now while I'm commentating it, fuck you. But anyway, so yeah, we've got the Milicent's Prosthesis, and then Rotten Wing Sword Insignia doesn't have the dex bonus, but it does have that successive hits effect too, and that'll stack with Milicent's Prosthesis, so you end up getting a fuckload of damage. If you can't get the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, then you can get the regular Wing Sword Insignia. It's not as strong as the Rotten one, but it still stacks with Milicent's Prosthesis. And of note is that you can't stack the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia and the regular Wing Sword Insignia. You can only have one Wing Sword Insignia plus Milicent's Prosthesis. So just to make sure that's clear. But yeah, so between these two talismans, all our attacks are going to just end up doing a fuckload of damage real fast once you've hit the enemy a couple times. Now in our other 2 talisman slots, we can switch things up based on whether or not you have the DLC and based on how you want to play this build. So right now on screen, you'll see there's the Ash of War spam with DLC loadout. So that's got the Talisman of the Dread, which increases the damage that the magma from the Magma Shower Ash of War does. So, you know, that's just going to be a good thing to have because it's a bunch of damage over time while the enemy's standing inside of the magma, and so it's just going to add a fuckload of damage to what you're doing. And I believe, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that that magma damage is also going to be buffed by Milicent and the Rotten Wing Sword. So you're just going to end up with the magma doing just a shitload of damage over time, in addition to the hits from the Spinning Slash. And then we've also got the Shard of Alexander. Shard of Alexander increases your Ash of War damage. You can never go wrong with it if you're using an Ash of War, so that's just a really obvious choice. Now, if you don't have the DLC and you can't get the Talisman of the Dread, then I swap that out over to the Fire Scorpion Charm. This increases all fire damage that you do by 12%, but also increases all damage that you take by 10%. So it's not as optimal. Technically, you know, there's trade-offs to it because the Fire Scorpion Charm will increase the damage that your hits with the sword itself does, in addition to the magma, but you know, you also get that damage taken increase, and we've only got 40 vigor, so I don't want to have that too much, which is why I consider this to be the less optimal one to use. But you know, if you don't have the DLC, or if you just have a different preference for how you want to run it, then you can use the Fire Scorpion Charm instead. And then I also included a loadout for if you want to focus on the jump attacks. So instead of using Shard of Alexander and the Talisman of the Dread, we've got the Claw Talisman, which increases your jump attack damage, and the Fire Scorpion Charm to increase your fire damage. Because you're not going to be using the magma if you're spamming the jump attacks instead, or at least if you're focusing on that. So you want the damage from the Fire Scorpion Charm to increase the damage that your actual jump attacks are doing instead. So obviously you would want to use this in addition to the Raptor's Black Feathers, so you get that extra jump attack damage. So it's really up to you. You have a bunch of choices in how to do this. And of course you have other options for how you could swap talismans out. For example, if you want to be a bit tankier, instead of using Fire Scorpion Charm, you could switch over to something like the Dragon Crest Great Shield for the 20% physical damage negation it gives you. You could switch over to something like the Turtle Talisman, or if you have the DLC, the Two-Headed Turtle Talisman for their extra stamina regen, which makes it easier to do a bunch of jump attacks in a row. You know, there's a bunch of different options you could have that you can experiment around with. The only two that I say definitely should always remain constant in this build are the Milicent's Prosthesis and the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, because those are just universally great talismans if you have a weapon that attacks fast. Up next, let's talk about our spells and other buffs and items that this build will use. Now for the spells, the 3 important ones here are Golden Vow, Howl of Shabriri, and Bestial Vitality. We got 33 Faith specifically so that we could use Howl of Shabriri, and then of course we get Golden Vow at 25 and Bestial Vitality at 15. Golden Vow is just a universally great buff. It increases the damage you do by 15% and reduces the damage you take by I think 10%. We've also got Howl of Shabriri. Howl increases all the damage you do by 25%, but it also increases all the damage you take by 30%. So it's a bit of a trade-off. The damage buff definitely makes it worth it, and also since we're combining it with Golden Vow, the damage taken increase isn't so bad because Golden Vow makes you take less damage, so it cancels itself out a little bit. But yeah, so between Vow and Howl, you're going to do a fuckload of damage. If you don't want to use Howl for whatever reason, because you don't like the damage taken, you can use Flame Grant Me Strength instead. It only buffs physical and fire damage, but those are the 2 damage types that we're doing with this build, so that's fine. And it doesn't last as long. I think Howl lasts for 45 seconds or something like that, and Flame Grant Me Strength only lasts for 30 seconds. Keep in mind that Howl of Shabriri and Flame Grant Me Strength don't stack, so you can only choose one, and that's why I only chose one instead of going with both of them. And our final buff spell is going to be Bestial Vitality. That gives you a 5 health per second health regen for 120 seconds, I believe. You know, it's just really good to have. It stacks with Golden Vow and Howl, so there's no great reason not to use it. It doesn't cost that much FP, and you know, having that extra bit of health regenerate, it's not gonna like fully heal you in the middle of a fight or something like that, but you know, if you get hit a couple times in a row, having that extra 10, 15, 20 health come back might be the difference between dying in 2 shots and, you know, having an extra hit worth of health to live or something. So Bestial Vitality is always great to have. Now, besides those 3 spells, since we have 33 Faith for Howl of Shabriri, I decided to just throw in a couple damaging spells, because why not? You have access to a bunch of them set at 33 Faith, so I decided to go with a bunch of fire-based ones, because our Flame Shrouding tier will buff that fire damage, you know. But if you wanted, you could use like lightning spells and stuff too. These are just like basic spells that are just generally good. You can swap them out to whatever you want, or just not use them at all if you don't want them. You're going to see me, I barely use them in this build because we're focusing on the swords themselves, you know. But Catch Flame, can't go wrong with that. It's just a point-blank blast of fire that it's fast and it does a fuckload of damage, so it's a good spell. Giant Slam Take Thee, good range. It's got a big AoE and it can be charged, so it makes a big explosion. You know, solid spell to have. Black Flame is nice to have against bosses that have big health pools, like the Fire Giant, for example, because Black Flame does damage over time based as a percentage of the enemy's max health. So basically, it takes off the same chunk of the health bar, no matter how much health they have. So against enemies that have bigger health pools, it does more damage. You know, it's a nice one to have, so why not? And then finally, we've got Frenzied Burst. It's basically a sniper shot of a fire laser from your eyes. Not only is it cool as fuck, but also it does a whole bunch of damage, and it's really good at like sniping enemies at range while you're exploring. So, you know, that's just a good spell to have. So like I said, you know, these spells are optional. I barely use them in this build. I mostly use the Faith for the buffs. You can use them if you want, or cut them out of the build, or switch them to different spells if you want. That's all up to you. With 33 Faith, you've got access to most of the incantations in the game, so, you know, experiment with different things and see what you like. And finally, for our Crystal Tears and our Wondrous Physic, we've got the Flame Shrouding Cracked Tear. That one is pretty self-explanatory. We're doing a bunch of fire damage with our Magma Blades, so having a Crystal Tear that buffs fire damage by 20% is, you know, generally pretty good to have, I think. And then, in addition to that, we've got the Thorny Cracked Tear. This is pretty much the same thing as the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia. I think the Thorny Tear is a little bit stronger than the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia. I'm not entirely sure, though. But it gives you that successive hit bonus. Both of these tiers last for 3 minutes, and if you combine them, plus all the other shit that we've got, you're going to do ridiculous amounts of damage with these weapons. So it's a very solid loadout. If you want, you can swap out the Thorny Tear. You don't get the Thorny Tear until you get to the Consecrated Snowfield, which is pretty late game. So if you want, you can swap that out for something like the Opaline Hardtear, which increases all of your damage negation instead. That helps to cancel out the effect of Howl of Shabriri, and you can never go wrong with having more damage negation, so that one's always just a universally good choice. You could get something like the Winged Crystal Tear, which basically gives you light rolls for 3 minutes. Light rolls are nice because they go further than medium rolls. They actually have the same amount of iframes, but they go further, and they're like, the animation lasts the same amount of time, but your guy moves faster because you're going further in the same amount of time. So light rolls are really helpful against a lot of bosses like Malenia, for example. It makes it easier to dodge a bunch of their attacks, so you can never go wrong with that one. There's other options like the Faith Not Crystal Tear for 10 extra Faith for more fire damage, the Dexterity Not Crystal Tear for 10 extra Dex for more physical damage. There's a bunch of different things you could use, so consider experimenting if you want, but you cannot go wrong with the Flame Tear and the Thorny Cracked Tear. That's it for the overview of the build. Now we're going to talk about how you should level it up over the course of your playthrough, starting at level 47 up to level 150. I'm starting at level 47 because assuming you start as a Wretch, the very first thing you need to do is get 40 Vigor. Just do that before anything else, and making the rest of the build, and your entire playthrough for that matter, will just be way easier. Just focus on getting Vigor to 40 before you level anything else up. In the meantime, you can use talismans like Radagon's Sword Seal in order to give you a bunch of extra points into endurance, strength, and dex, so that you have more stat points to work with while you're going around and leveling up and playing the game. But 40 Vigor is just always priority number one, no matter what. I also leveled endurance up to 20 at this point, so that way you can wear your armor and have weapons and stuff as you're going along, and just not have to worry about that. And then, so the sword only requires 9 strength, so we don't have to level up strength. It requires 15 dexterity, so assuming you get Milicent's Prosthesis, or even the Prosthesis Wearer's Heirloom, you can get the 15 dex. But also, assuming you're going to go and farm the Magma Blade, then at the start of your playthrough, you won't need to worry about having the 15 dex anyway until you have the Magma Blade. So just sticking at 10 dex is fine. And then, of course, there's the 16 Faith, which is just another minimum requirement for the sword. And also having 16 Faith gives you access to a couple buffs like Flame Grant Me Strength and Bestial Vitality. So that's a nice thing to level up. The next milestone I went to was 80. So by this point, you should have the sword, so you're going to want the minimum requirements, including the dexterity, strength, and faith. So after getting the minimum requirements, I would recommend first getting 25 faith, so that you have access to Golden Vow, and then after that, it's pretty much a matter of just pumping strength, because that's where most of our damage is coming from. Once you get to about 40 strength, then after that, you can start putting points into faith and get that up to level 33 for Howl of Shabriri. So by level 100, we have 40 strength, 15 dex, 33 faith. Then after that, there was level 125, which we just spent 20 minutes talking about. So now we're going to talk about going past 125. The first milestone is at 150. The very first thing you want to focus on is getting your vigor up to 60, because that's just the most valuable thing to level up. And especially if we're going to be going into the DLC at all, you're going to want 60 vigor for that. And then after that, you'll have like 5 points to work with. So I just put them into dex, because that's what's going to give us the most additional damage on the sword. And then I decided to cap it off at 200. So by this point, you have enough points where you can either have like 50 in the 3 damage stats that this weapon scales with, which is probably what you should do, but I decided instead to go to the 60 soft cap on strength and on faith, and then dump the rest of the points into dex. That way we're increasing the fire damage that we do, so we get more of a benefit from the flame shrouding tier, and then, you know, the strength is the main damage stat that it gets its physical damage from. And then after that, just, you know, dump it into dex, because you have nowhere else to put your points. And with that, we conclude talking about the build. So now I'll show you where to find the most important items for this build. As you might expect, our first and most important item is going to be getting the Magma Blade from the Volcano Manor. There's a few ways to get here, so I'll link my video about that in the description. But basically, when you get to the manor, you're going to talk to Tanith, and she will offer you to let you join the Volcano Manor. So you accept, and she'll give you the drawing room key. Then you're going to go into the hallway over here and take the first door on your right. You can unlock it with the key. You're going to want a lantern or a torch for this. There's an illusory wall, so all you got to do is just walk up to it or roll into it and it'll disappear. And then you're going to run through the sex dungeon, go past all the snails, sneak past the Bloodhound Knight so he doesn't kick your ass. And this will take you to the prison town. So we need to get up to the Temple of Igle up there. I like to take a shortcut to get through the prison town. So, first of all, I want to point out, we need to kill man serpents to get the Magma Blade. You see, this guy has a Magma Blade, but it's not glowing. We need to find the glowing ones. There's 2 of them in the game, and they're up past the Temple of Igle. So you drop down the rooftop here, and this takes you down to this cliffside, and then you can drop down to the lava. You're gonna just jump and run across the lava. It doesn't actually do all that much damage to you. I'm in New Game Plus, so I can run at full speed, but if you're not in New Game Plus, then it'll slow you down to a walk. You can roll through the magma to go slightly faster. Just make sure you keep an eye on your health and drink health flasks when you need to. But make your way to the land, and then you're going to follow the stairs up here over to this elevator. Take it up, and this will take you up to the temple. There's a Black Flame Monk, so you might want to kill him. Before you go into the temple, you're going to make a left over here and come to this bridge. Make sure you hit the lever. This is a shortcut that'll take you back to the Prison Town Church, which is a site of grace that we just grabbed a second ago. And so if you die fighting the Godskin Noble here, instead of having to run all the way back through the town, you'll just respawn at the church, and you can just come across the bridge straight to the temple. So I'm going to speed through this fight here, but basically you're going to want some sleep pots. The Godskins are super weak to sleep, so if you hit them with a sleep pot, I missed my first couple, so it didn't really put them to sleep. But if you get a solid hit with one, it'll put them to sleep in one hit. Then you can cast your buffs and do all your stuff. And they're super weak to bleed, so I put blood grease on my Flamberge, and then I like to just hit them with a couple charged heavy attacks, and then I follow up with the Piercing Fang, or you could do a 3rd charged heavy attack. Go for the Riposte, that'll proc a bleed and do a fuckload of damage, and then you basically repeat, and they die super fast, so you might have to do it like 2 or 3 times depending on your weapon. But this guy's not hard at all if you use sleep and bleed. And in this footage, I'm in New Game Plus 2, so he's even stronger than he'll be if you're just in regular New Game. So it shouldn't be too hard. Anyway, after that, you take this elevator up, and from here it's a pretty linear path up to where the man serpents are. So I'm going to show you, because there's a path that we're going to use to, like a farming route, because unfortunately you need to farm the magma blades from these guys. So I'm going to show you how to set that up and how it works. So here's one of the guys with the glowing sword. There are two of these guys in the game, so this is one of them. Go past him, and in this dark room, on your left side, there's an elevator. This is a shortcut that takes you back down to the Temple of Igle. And so this is going to be really important for our farming run. So you're going to see it takes you down into this little alley that leads straight to the temple. So the farming run is you rest at the Grace to respawn the enemies, then you're going to run out through the alleyway to the elevator, take the elevator up, then once you're at the top, what you're going to do is wait for the button to pop back out, and you're going to run over the button to send the elevator back down. So make sure you send it back down. This is important for saving time. It saves you a few seconds every time. So there's two guys with the Magma Blade. So the first one is over here, directly in front of us. Kill him. He shouldn't be too hard. I recommend using something like Piercing Fang or, an Ash of War that just does a ton of damage to kill him fast. Keep an eye out to see if he actually dropped the sword or not. And then you're going to come back around the corner to this guy. You can sneak up on him. I didn't sneak up on him here, which is why he turned around and attacked me. But I'll show you me sneaking up on him in a minute. Kill him. Check to make sure he doesn't actually drop the sword, or whether he dropped the sword. Then you're going to come over to this cross thing, and you see there's a chair next to it. So you can jump over the banister here, and this takes you down some cliffs. There's an item there to grab. I don't know what it is, whatever. But this takes you down some cliffs that take you back to the alleyway that leads you into the temple. And so you can quickly get back to the Grace and then rest at it to respawn the enemies. The reason why following this route is important is because at 100 item discovery, the Magma Blade has a 1% chance of dropping, okay? And that fucking sucks. So you need to use Silver Pickled Foul Feet to increase your item discovery. And if you were to kill these two guys and then fast travel back to the Grace to respawn them faster, then you'd have to use another Foul Foot every time. This lets you use your Foul Feet a bit more efficiently so you don't burn through them as fast. So good luck farming. Up next, we're going to grab the Clawmark Seal from the Bestial Sanctum and the Dragon Barrow. So you can get to the Bestial Sanctum from the Third Church of Marika in East Limgrave. You'll see behind the church there's this little pond. There's a teleporter hidden in some bushes here, and when you take that teleporter, it brings you all the way over to the Bestial Sanctum and the Dragon Barrow. You'll see this door is shut, but you can just open it up and walk in, and there's a Site of Grace on your right, so make sure you grab this. So in order to get the Clawmark Seal, we need to feed a death root to Garank there. So from the Third Church of Marika, if you head north, you'll see these cliffs, and there will be spirit springs that you can jump up on Torrent, and this takes you to Summonwater Village. Grab the Site of Grace on the west side of the village just to save you some time in case you die. And in this village, you are going to kill this Tibia Mariner. I'm using my Flamberge here, but he is weak to holy damage and strike damage, so I recommend you get something like a club or some kind of a hammer with like Sacred Blade on it, so you can do a bunch of holy and strike damage. When you kill him, he drops a death root. So bring that back to Garank and feed it to him, and he will have some dialogue and tell you about how much he loved the death root. It's like his treats because he's a puppy. But yeah, and when you give him one, he will give you the Clawmark Seal, which is the seal we're going to use to cast our incantations. Now we move on to armor. So the primary set we're going to be using is the Knight set at the Round Table Hold. So go to the Round Table Hold, go into the North Hallway, and talk to the Twin Maiden Husks, and they will sell the Knight set to you for 13,500 runes. So you might need to kill some bosses or do a little farming in order to be able to afford this, but it's worth getting because it's just a really solid overall armor set that has a good mix between protection, weight, and fashion, and it's good to have. We're also going to head over to the Sage's Cave in the Altus Plateau, where we're going to grab the Raptor's Black Feathers chest piece. So there's two ways to get up to the Altus Plateau. Number one is from the Grand Lift of Dectus. This is all the way in the very north of Liurnia, so you can get here by following the Bellum Highway from the main academy gate, Site of Grace. So in order to use the Grand Lift of Dectus, you need to get the two halves of the Dectus Medallion. The left half is at Fort Height in southeast Limgrave. It's up in the tower, being guarded by a knight. And then the right half is in Fort Faroth in the Dragon Barrow. So you can see this is just south of the Bestial Sanctum, so you just follow the road south. There's a spirit spring behind the Minor Erd Tree there. It takes you up to the fort. Inside the tower, or up the tower of the fort, is the right half of the medallion. So you bring that shit over to the Grand Lift Adectus, and that takes you up to the Altus Plateau, and then you can just head straight up north around the corner, and this takes you over to this lake here that has the Sage's Cave. Alternatively, if you want, you can go through the Ruin-Strewn Precipice dungeon to get up to the Altus Plateau. So from Liurnia, if you're on lake level, if you're like, running on the lake, you can come up to the ravine up here on the north side of it and just run all the way down the ravine. There's a bunch of ladders and shit and like a little village thing, and you climb up, you go through this dungeon, you gotta kill a boss called Magma Worm Makar. He's not too hard, and that takes you up to the Abandoned Coffin, and then you've got the Sage's Cave right around the corner from you. And so that's where we need to go. The cave is on the northeast side of the lake. It might be a little hard to spot, but I think at nighttime there's spirit jellyfishes here, so if you set the time to night and then come, it might be a little bit easier to find. But anyway, so go inside the cave. There's a bunch of illusory walls here. There's also skeletons, so I recommend you bring a weapon that does holy damage. But basically, we're just running through this. There's a bunch of chests in this cave that has a bunch of good loot, but there's one chest in particular which has the Raptor's black feathers, so I'm just going to run through it and show you that. You can pretty much just run past all the skeletons. Once you get to this room with the waterfall, be careful because there's a gap here that you got to jump across, so make sure you jump across it. And then immediately on your left, there's another very obvious illusory wall, and the chest on the left here has the Raptor's black feathers, which will increase your jump attack damage when worn. Up next, we're going to start grabbing talismans. The first one I'm going to grab is Milicent's Prosthesis, but the problem is that it takes forever to get, and you know me, my video is already an hour long at this point, and I don't want this shit to be 3 hours long, so I'm going to link you to a shorter video about Milicent's quest specifically, but basically, that'll be down in the description, or there'll be a card on the top right, around here, whatever. But basically, you follow her quest until you get to Dominula, the Windmill Village, and Altus Plateau. You kill the Godskin Apostle, and then you rest at the Site of Grace there, and Milicent will appear next to the windmill afterwards, and then you can kill her here. If you kill her before here, she doesn't drop the Prosthesis. It has to be in the Windmill Village. You kill her here, and she'll drop Milicent's Prosthesis, so that's what I recommend you do, so that you have it early. What I will show is the Stillwater Cave down in Liurnia of the Lakes, where we can get the Winged Sword Insignia, which will stack with Milicent's Prosthesis. So you'll see here at the lake, right under the cliff where Stormvale Castle is, you just head to the wall here, and it takes you into Stillwater Cave. This is a very short and boring cave, so I'm just going to skip through it, and we need to kill the boss here for the Winged Sword Insignia. It's a clean rotten night. I like to use Piercing Fang or Impaling Thrust, because these guys block a lot, and I find it a lot easier to deal with them if you can just use an Ash of War that punches through their block, like Piercing Fang, for example, and that makes it super easy to kill them. And once she is dead, she will drop the Winged Sword Insignia, which you can stack with Milicent's Prosthesis. In Milicent's quest, you can either get the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia or Milicent's Prosthesis, and you can't stack the two Winged Sword Insignias, so that's why I recommend getting Milicent's Prosthesis instead. Up next, we're going to head over to Fort Lythe for the Fire Scorpion Charm. So getting here can be a little confusing. The route isn't like super obvious. From the Erdtree Gazing Hill, you got to go up this hill that's here, and this brings you up to the Wyndham Ruins where there's a Tibia Mariner. So I like to put a marker there just so you can see it a bit more clearly. And then on the west side of the Wyndham Ruins is the entrance to the Seedwater River. And then from here, you just follow the river straight up and around, and this takes you straight to the fort. So you see from the Erdtree Gazing Hill, if you just go straight north up ahead of you, there's this hill that takes you up to the Wyndham Ruins. Side note, the Tibia Mariner here drops a death root, and we're going to need a total of 3 death roots, including the one we grabbed earlier. So you might want to kill them while you're here. But for now, just run past the Wyndham Ruins, and this will take you to the Seedwater River. Grab the Site of Grace so you have it. And then I'm going to skip through it because it's just a straight path up the river, and, just follow the river and you'll end up there. The one thing I do want to show is there's these geysers here, and they do a fuckload of damage, so like if you're low vigor, they might even instantly kill you, so be careful of them. Just wait, be patient, don't try to like run through them. But anyway, so at the end of the river, you'll find the fort, so it's pretty easy to get up into. You just go on the right side of it, and there's a staircase. You'll run into Fat Patricia. You don't have to kill her if you don't want to. If you kill her, she drops the Prelate's Inferno Crozier, but you can just run past and open this door and go up the steps of the fort. So at the top here, you'll hear like a ghost talking. Well, you'll see the subtitles on the bottom. So you come around on your left, and there's like these rubble here that you can use to jump over the wall. And right next to it is the Fire Scorpion charm. Getting the Shard of Alexander also takes a long time, like Milicent's Prosthesis, so I'm going to link a faster video in the description that'll show you how to get it more, and there'll be a card on the top right of the screen. But I want to point out this lava lake is one of the spots where you have to meet Alexander, but like I said, I don't want this video to be 9 hours long. After that, there's the Claw Talisman in Stormvale Castle. So we need to get to the Rampart Tower in Stormvale, and there's 2 different ways to get there. I want to show both just in case. The main gate is faster, but a lot of people kill Gostock for whatever reason, because shitty YouTube videos tell you to kill Gostock, and yeah, that's right, I'm going there. But yeah, so if Gostock isn't dead, you can go through the main gate. So tell him, no, I'll use the main gate. Then you can come around and walk over to the gate, and he will open it for you. You come into the corner here on your left, and then I like to line up with that fire over there, and if you run past it on the right side, usually the ballistas won't hit you. You might get hit once or twice, but you respawn at the graves right there, and you can just try again. And after that, it's basically just a straight path up, so I'm just going to speed through it here. Once you get to these steps, there's 2 ballistas. I like to come on the side and then run straight across to the right, and that should make both of them shoot behind you, so you don't get owned by them. And then you just run past while they're reloading. You're going to come up here onto your left, and this will take you into the dining room with the Grafted Scion. So make a right, and you're going past it to the far doorway, where there's an elevator that will take you straight up to the Rampart Tower. At the top of the tower, you're going to make a right, and in the room right here is the Rampart Tower. If you want to skip to where the Claw Talisman is, just skip like a minute or 2 ahead in the video, and you should be about there. But for now, I'm going to show the other path. So instead of going through the main gate, if you want to go around the castle, this is the easier route because you don't have to deal with the ballistas. But again, it's a really straightforward route, so I'm just going to skip through it. There's a site of grace here called I think it's called Cliffside Path or something. You're going to run up into this big room, and there's guys throwing fire pots at you. We need to get through this door and climb up a ladder, but the door is locked. So you got to turn around and keep going up. There will be a door on your right here, so you're going to open it up. If Gostock is alive, then when you come in here, he'll lock the door behind you, and you'll see there's a Banished Knight in the corner there. So before you actually walk into the room, cast any buffs that you have so that you can fight the Knight more easily. But since Gostock is alive, he's going to lock me in here. So try not to get murdered by the Knight. He's not too hard. Look at that sick backstab that I got. Kill him, and then you can grab the key from the corpse right here. And then you can just open the door and drop down to the other locked door. Go up the ladder, and then from here it's a very straightforward path over to the Rampart Tower. Just be careful of the Banished Knight that's in this room. But here we are at the Grace. From the site of Grace, head outside, and on your right, you'll see there's this platform thing you can stand on top of. We need to do a sprinting jump across to the rooftop over there. So the problem is that if you start holding down your sprint button while you're standing still, you'll do a backstep and just jump off of the platform thing. So what I like to do is if you stand still and jump while standing still, and then while you're in mid-air, you start holding your dodge button or your sprint button, then that'll make you not do the back step, and you'll be in sprinting mode. So you jump while mid-air, start holding down B or shift or whatever it is, and then you can just do the sprint jump. So I'm sprinting right now, just run forward and jump, and that should take you across the gap. From there, there's a pillar you can jump up here, and you just carefully walk around this ledge so you don't fall off. There's 5 guys up here that you want to kill, because if you don't kill them, or 4 guys, excuse me, oh, I miscounted, oh my god. But if you don't kill them, then they will knock you off the ladder while you're climbing up it. So kill them, then go up the ladder, and at the top of this tower, there is the Claw Talisman. If you have the DLC, you can get the Talisman of the Dread from the Elder's Hovel. So, from the Graveside Plain, where you start the DLC, you can grab the map on the road right next to you, and then you're going to follow the road up north over to the 3-path cross, and then go across the bridge, and that'll take you to the castle front in front of Castle Ensis. From here, we're heading southeast, so you're going to see there's 2 paths here. We're taking the lower path that doesn't have the road, and if you grab the map, you can clearly see there's this dark spot here. That leads you down into this poison bog, and then the Elder's Hovel is at the end of the bog. So you can put a marker here, so you have a clear direction where to go. It's right next to the Ruinforge lava intake in case you want a closer sight of Grace, but I'm just using this one as a reference point so you can see where you need to go in the first place. So instead of following the road that's on our left, we're going to go down towards this camp with the Mesmer soldiers here. We're going to go past the forge underneath this passage thing. And you'll see off in the distance that building over there is the Elder's Hovel. So it's just a straight shot through the bog over to the Elder's Hovel. Don't get murdered by the rats and flowers that are here. And once you get to the Elder's Hovel, inside it, you will find the Talisman of the Dread. I hope you like killing putrid avatars, because now we need to kill 2 of them in order to get our crystal tears for this build. So the first one is going to be the Minor Erd tree over in Caelid from the Rotview balcony or the Smoldering Church. You can just head up to the tree. I came from the balcony, and then you can just drop down the roots here, and it just takes you straight over to the tree. These guys are weak to strike damage and fire damage, so you can either use something like a hammer, or of course, if you already have the Magma Blades, you'll be able to fuck them up with that because it does fire damage. And once this guy dies, he drops the Green Burst Crystal Tear, which is a nice alternative tier. It increases your stamina regen. But he also drops the Flame Shrouding Cracked Tear, which is what we came for, because this increases all the fire damage you do. We're also going to go over to the Consecrated Snowfield. I have a guide about getting here that'll be linked in the description. It's a bit of a process, so I don't want to put the whole thing in this video. But once you're in the Snowfield, there's the Minor Erd tree in the northeast corner of it, so we're going to head up to that. Again, there's another putrid avatar. This one is stronger than the one in Caelid, so be careful. But again, weak to strike, weak to fire, so if you had the Magma Blades, you'll fuck him up pretty quick. And once you kill him, he will drop the Thorny Cracked Tear, which stacks with Milicent's Prosthesis and the Winged Sword Insignia, and is going to make you do insane amounts of damage once you get a bunch of hits in. If you're at a point in the game where you can't get to the Snowfield yet, or just if you want an alternative talisman to be a little tankier, then you can head over to the Minor Erd tree and the Dragon Barrow. So this is the one on the east side of Caelid, not the west Caelid one that we just killed, but the one in the Dragon Barrow. Again, you can get here from Fort Frauth or the Bestial Sanctum, kill the putrid avatar here, and he will drop the Opaline Hardtear, which increases all of your damage negations by 15%. Finally, we're going to grab the 3 buff spells that we're going to use for this build. So the first one is going to be Golden Vow up in Mount Gelmir. So you can get over to the Bridge of Iniquity site of Grace from the Altus Plateau. Just follow the road north through Altus. It'll take you over to the forest spanning Great Bridge. There's a teleporter here, and that'll take you to the other end of the bridge. And then you can come up around and to the left, and you can drop down these tombstones that are here to go down the cliffside. And then you can just follow the roads west over to the Bridge of Iniquity. And then from here, we're heading northwest up to the Corpse Stench Shack. Along the way, there's a bunch of abductor versions, so be careful of them. And also, by the shack, there's a bunch of dogs, so be careful of the dogs. And you'll be invaded by Anastasia, Tarnished Eater, once you get to the shack, so be careful of her. But you can just run inside and grab Golden Vow. Killing Anastasia is optional. She drops a Sacred Butchering Knife, which is a decent little weapon, but not relevant to this guide. After that, we're going to head over to the Frenzy Flaming Tower in northern Liurnia, where we're going to grab Howl of Shabriri. So I have a video, again, that'll be linked in the description or in a card, that shows you like a detailed explanation of how to turn off the tower, because as you approach it, it inflicts madness on you. But basically, if you follow this path here that I just marked out, you can see there's like that line there. That's a lower cliffside that gives you some cover from it and makes it easier to get up to it, so I'll show you that in a second. You're also going to want to have fire pots because there's guys at the top of the tower that you need to kill, and it's easy if you have fire pots. So you come up here, you'll see you're going to be getting hit by the madness here if you just stand still while the tower is active, but you'll see there's on the right there's a high path, and on the left there's a low path. You're going to follow the low path, and if you hug the cliff wall here, then the madness of the tower shouldn't be able to hit you, so you just follow this up to the spirit spring that's up here. Stand in the spirit spring and wait for the tower to turn off, and then, you know, because it goes on for a few seconds and then shuts off for a few seconds. Once it turns off, you can jump up and you can land on this wall next to the tower, and then you can just jump around into it. You don't want to go down because there's rats down there. Climb up the ladder, and inside this chest, you will grab Howl of Shabriri. While you're up here, if you want, you can jump on top of the chest and this gives you extra height so that you can hit with the fire pots. And then what you're going to do is aim up. There are 6 guys on the top floor of the tower, so you're going to need like 2 or 3 fire pots in order to hit them, but you can throw them up at the thing. I'm using sleep pots here, but you should use fire pots, obviously. You throw them up at the ceiling, and it explodes and hits them through the floor, and once all 6 of them are dead, the tower is disabled permanently. And for the final item to finish off this build, we're going to get Bestial Vitality from Garenk at the Bestial Sanctum. So in order for him to give you Bestial Vitality, you need to feed him a total of 3 death roots. So we already fed him 1 before that we got in Summon Water Village. If you want a second one, then to the west of that there's the Death Touch Catacombs, so you can follow the road straight from the village to the west, and you'll see there's like a path to get up over here, and like there's a little corner there. So that takes you to the catacombs. That'll be right on your left. Kill the boss there, which is a Black Knife Assassin, and then in a chest behind her, there's the Death Root, so make sure you grab that after you kill her. You have to actually open the chest and grab it. And then finally, the other easiest one to get is dropped by another Tibia Mariner up here on the east side of Liurnia. So you see on the Liurnia Highway, there's like these woods over here. He should be in this general area. I'm not sure what the exact spot is, but he's like right around there. And, you know, weak to holy, weak to strike damage. So kill him, and he drops another Death Root. And then once you have all 3, you can bring them over to Garenk and feed them to him. For the second Death Root, he'll give you Bestial Sling, and for the third one, he'll give you Bestial Vitality, which is the one that we want. So now we're done setting up the build, and I'm going to show you some gameplay and talk about how the build works, and give you some tips about how to get the most out of it. So first off, I decided to fight Mohg because Mohg is resistant to fire, and I want to show how nuts the damage is on this thing, because despite him being resistant to fire, it'll still fuck him up. So you see I have this set up for the jump attacks right now, because of the Talismans I had the Fire Scorpion Charm and the Claw Talisman, in addition to the Rattling Sword Insignia and Milicent's Prosthesis. So before I go into the fight, I cast all my buffs, I drink my Wondrous Physic, and then I'm going to let Mohg come to me. He's slow, so I threw a Fan Dagger to make him speed up. That's a pro tip right there. And basically, you hit him with jump attacks. Just do 1 or 2 at a time, and then just be patient and get ready to dodge a hit. And you can see, despite him being resistant to fire, I am just shredding his health. I'm on New Game +2 in this clip, so not only is he an endgame level boss, because Mohgwyn Palace is scaled to be like the endgame. Not only is he an endgame level boss, he's also resistant to fire and has extra health and extra resistance as the result of me being in New Game +2. And this thing just does such a ridiculous amount of damage that it is just shredding him in like 60 seconds. So it's a pretty solid build, I gotta say. Stacking those successive hit talismans in particular is what makes it super strong. But there's also going to be the Ash of War that you're going to see in a minute, which will fuck him up. And if you want proof on my New Game +2, you can look at how many runes he drops. You can Google it on Fetch Your Life or whatever to see how many he drops in New Game +2. I believe in New Game Plus he drops, or in New Game 0 he drops 400,000. So here in New Game +2 you're going to see he drops 900,000. So New Game +2, ton of damage. And since the DLC came out, I figured in addition to fighting Mohg, I would also fight Radahn, because those are the bosses you need to kill to get to the DLC. So you see here, I have it set up for spamming the Ash of War, because I had the Fire Scorpion Charm and the Shard of Alexander. So, and of course I'm using the Fire Scorpion Charm because at this point, you know, if you haven't killed Radahn and Mohg, then you won't be able to get the Talisman of the Dread. Now, as with any build, most of your damage is coming from upgrading your weapons, so I have my Magma Blades at +10, which is appropriate for Radahn because this is New Game +2, so he's scaled up. And the rest of your damage pretty much comes from the buffs. It doesn't really come from your stats all that much. So what I did is, instead of casting my buffs and then entering the fight, I entered the fight, got him to start coming towards me, and then I cast all my buffs. That way they won't run out while I'm in the middle of fighting him, and so I'll be able to maintain my maximum DPS. And as you can see, that paid off really well, because I just spammed fucking Magma Shower, and he died really fast. And if you go back and pay attention, you'll see the DPS from the magma that he's standing in is just melting him, even while I'm not actually hitting him. Here's a random clip that I recorded of me just using the Magma Shower. It'll one-shot most basic enemies. And if you want a real dopamine rush, what you got to do is come into this room here in the Bellarat Tower Settlement at the very entrance to it, with all these little spider scorpions, and then you do the magma shower and they all die, and the sound of them all dying at once makes my brain release happy juice, and I like that. And of course, this thing isn't just used for killing bosses and spider scorpions. It'll shred pretty much anything that you might meet while you're exploring a dungeon or the open world or whatever. You saw there I hit him with the running attack, because the running attack does 4 hits in a row. That procs up the Milicents and the Rotten Sword Insignia, and then when I followed up with Spinning Slash afterwards, or the Magma Shower afterwards, I'm just going to call it Spinning Slash. When I follow up with Spinning Slash afterwards, the damage is buffed by those 2 talismans, because I just procced it by hitting him with the running L1. So that's a pro tip too, is you can do like running attacks or jumping attacks to proc up the multi-hit buff, and then use the Ash of War for just even more insane damage from it. So those guys were just like basic generic enemies. Here's a Horned Warrior. These guys are known for being fucking monsters. And, you know, look, I hit him with 1 Spitting Slash, and it already took off half of his health. I got kicked in the face, but you saw the magma kept fucking him up there. So yeah, you know. Here I'm going to fight the Divine Beast Dancing Lion. This took me a couple tries, and you'll notice instead of casting Howl of Shabriri, I'm casting Flame Grant Me Strength, because Howl of Shabriri increases the damage you do, but it also increases the damage you take. And I felt like part of the reason why I was getting owned by this guy was because I'm not super familiar with his moveset, so I get hit more than I do against, you know, most of the enemies in the regular game. And you can see I had it set up for Ash of War spam, using Shard of Alexander and the Talisman of the Dread. And, you know, I mean, look at how quickly it's taking down his health, you know. You only need to hit the Ash of War once or twice, and it takes off a substantial chunk of health. Something that I could do, and I think I do it once or twice here, like that, is I hit him with a jump attack that hits 4 times, and so it procs up the multi-hit buff from Milicent's, the Winged Sword Insignia, and the Thorny Cracked Tear, and then you can hit him with the Spinning Slash afterwards, like I was just talking about, and that makes the Spinning Slash do even more damage. So that's the reason why I'm going for the jump attacks here, because I want to proc that up. And of course, Spinning Slash also does a surprising amount of poise damage, so you might end up getting a bunch of poise breaks too if you keep up the pressure. So overall, you know, there was only like, I think that was like my 4th or 5th try, and it went pretty well, you know. It's a strong build even for the DLC, is what I get to say. Here's the Draconic Tree Sentinel, which is another enemy that's resistant to fire. So in this clip, I'm also not using Howl, so the damage buff I get isn't as high as if I had Howl of Shabriri. Flame Grant Me Strength is 20% to physical and fire damage. Howl of Shabriri is 25% to all damage that you do, but you also take more damage. But yeah, so despite this enemy both being resistant to fire and me not having quite as high of a buff as I could, I am still absolutely massacring him. So, you know, it's a solid build. Just be careful. Don't spam it too much, because you want to be able to dodge, you know, because the enemy is going to respond at some point and hit you, you know. And then to finish off the video, because we're about an hour in, and I don't want this to be too long, I have much more footage, but, you know, I don't want it to be too long, even though it already is. I figured we would fight the Fire Giant. So again, I start the fight, and then once I get reasonably close to him, I cast all my buffs, so that way they last a bit longer into the actual fight itself, instead of, like, immediately running out. So, you know, you really want to make sure you're taking advantage of your buffs. And then I get close to him, and I just hit him with Spinning Slash. And you can see between the hits from Spinning Slash, not only being boosted by things like Shroud of Alexander, and look at that jump attack damage, oh my god, the jump attacks are probably even stronger than the Spinning Slashes, but, you know, between being boosted, excuse me, by Shroud of Alexander and Talisman of the Dread and all that, or Foul Scorpion Charm, or whatever it is that I'm using, between that plus Milicent and the Winged Sword Insignia and the Thorny Cracked Tear, it just shreds him, even though he has like 80% fire resistance. Here I'm going to go for Spinning Slash, and I get the Poise Break, because Spinning Slash does a whole bunch of poise damage, and then I fuck his head up, and he is dead. you know? So even against an enemy that, oh, and look, I'm not even using Round Wing Sword Insignia, I'm using regular Wing Sword Insignia. So, yeah, again, it could have been even stronger. But yeah, you know, so it's a very strong build. Even against enemies that are resistant to fire, it absolutely melts shit. And so yeah, I hope you found that helpful and or entertaining. Please leave a like, share the video, consider subscribing. Make sure you check out the links to other videos down in the description, not all of which are going to be mine, so I can't vouch for the quality of them too much, but there will be links to other people's videos about like Milicent's quest and Alexander's quest. Make sure you check those out if you want to get those items. My name is Diabedor, and I will catch you later.